well, this is gonna suck. This is gonna be an intellectual trash talk of the VR as a product and why I think it failed. So, let's talk about the actual gameplay feel of the VR and why exactly I think it feels so bad to play and what I think may be able to be done. So off the bat, the first thing we need to discuss in order to see my point of view is the fact that I do not define action combat and FPS combat as the same thing. Action is rock, paper, scissors, and strategy-based combat with reaction time playing a factor at some key moments. FPS games are reaction-based games with some rock, paper, scissors, and strategy-based combats playing a factor at other key moments. So basically, in my definition, rock, paper, scissors based combat plus reaction time is like what's found in fighting games. If I see an opponent that's been using mostly low attacks and predict that he will low attack again, depending on the timing, I may have to use my reactions to block it in time. But my mind has already predicted this outcome in another timeline, and I just need to execute the prediction. Or if I'm a super mega mind, I can predict and block before the attack even comes, preventing the need for a reaction time at all. Then there's FPS combat, which again I define as reaction-based combat with some rack, really, rack, god damn it, with some rock, paper, scissors as strategy elements at key moments. With FPS combat, most of the skill is identifying a stimulus and adjusting accordingly in order to hit said stimulus. The strategy comes in when you need to think about your positioning in games such as Overwatch. Then, the occasional rock, paper, scissors comes in during peak wars when you can predict an opponent's peak and pre-fire, preventing the need for any reactions, and for a moment, you feel as if maybe you've reached enlightenment and Buddha has become your bitch. But of course, this requires vastly more experience to execute. I believe the issue with APOC came in when they attempted to combine the two playstyles of action and FPS. I think it was a huge mistake fundamentally to put ranged weapons like bows, which play like an FPS game, in the BR at all. They tried to do two things and did both poorly. See, to use Overwatch as an example again, one of the reasons I think it did so well when it came out is that it was easy to describe. A team-based shooter, and that was its core purpose. And Overwatch did that one thing really well. Except not really. Because they threw in champions like D.Va, Reinhardt, and Mercy in the mix. I mean, look at D.Va and Reinhardt's shields, then Mercy's res. They were considered absolute cancer when the game came out because they were used as counterplay to godlike aim. This was a chance for players with less FPS knowledge to come in and still be almost as good as godlike players based on pure strategy and Pepega plays alone. And all during this time, they could slowly adjust to the faster paced gameplay, enough so to maybe even play the FPS aspects for themselves later on down the line. This idea of play and counterplay I think are vital to gameplay experience of any PvP game, especially games with a core mechanic as complicating and challenging as aim. The fundamental issue with APOC that I see is the lack of definition that every game should have. There simply wasn't enough focus put on the melee combat of the game. Is the game melee combat with range thrown in the mix, or is it range with melee thrown in the mix? I don't think this was well defined enough initially for the BR, and I think that's why it's such an unfun game mode. Trying to explain how to be good in the BR, someone comes out like this. Bow shot to a lot of ammo, melee lunge, melee spam to a lot of stamina, but not really because if you're good at aim you can kill everyone without touching them with melee. Except not really because you can have some level of success with melee, so it's kind of action combat. Except not really, because you're fucked if the person on the other side of the screen has the capacity to stick the pointy end of the arrow at you and fire. There's no main playstyle and then 2 to 3 counter playstyles that other people can be good at. Like for example, if it was just melee combat, like it is now, but with more focus, with wands and drifters as the anti-fun combat that the FPS players are given to punish melee combat people for. Me personally, I realized very quickly that even after pushing to be very, very good with melee combat, that it wasn't rewarding enough relative to range to justify using it. Even in melee range, sometimes ranged weapons are still better. This, in my opinion, is pretty bad as an overall issue, and having FPS mechanics in with action combat and attempting to have each play an equal role in a game is not possible and can't be fixed. Because of this design flaw, there is nothing really gained from playing for the average gamer, and for people who are attempting to play at the competitive level, you cap very quickly as a result. This creates a spiral of downward momentum and the core gameplay loop. For the average gamer, they play a game for two reasons. One is fun, and the other is a measurable amount of progression and/or a fear of loss. A new player requires an environment with other new players in order to have an enjoyable experience in a PvP game. An issue with APOC is that new players are not joining and or staying because they can't find a good spot where they feel comfortable with their skills, even if they don't necessarily win at all. This problem exists in any PvP game, but it's heavily inflated by the action FPS dynamic present in the BR. Many players will attempt to fight more with the melee combat than they probably should, that being something I've personally experienced and seen, and they'll end up dying a lot to people who know the strength of the FPS mechanics as a result. This ruins any chance for them to have a good experience because the challenge of taking on people who have already put a lot of time into the game is too monumental and quickly crushes many people's desire to play. Now, in terms of progression, there really isn't any. All the cosmetics in the legendary path can be bought or aren't worth the effort to get, so the one motivation they could have possibly had is now stripped away. The fear of loss was somewhat given to the players with the dragon mount, but that quickly went away considering how small the task was and the short due date. The fear of loss can also be given in the form of degrading skill. It doesn't always need to be physical. But in the case of APOC, they're not having fun anyways because they're just getting headshot and insta-gib, so why would they ever care about their skill in an unfun game? It's like instead of giving the carrot, you just occasionally beat the dog viciously with the stick. Of course, I want to add to this by saying I don't think the fear of loss is a great way to get people to stay and continue playing. It was something I really hated in games like BDO that I played a little while back. But once you fail to motivate a player, they just become indifferent. I went into a stream one time and heard another streamer say something like, "Woo, I died. I literally feel nothing." And I just realized I need a supercomputer to calculate the black flux in his voice. On to the people who want to be really freaking good and spend a lot of time and dedication practicing. Many people in this category will quickly reach a point where they realize how important range combat is relative to melee combat, and that it gives you significant more control over the variables in a fight. Depending on their gaming skill set, they may be extremely comfortable with this realization as it gives them an automatic leg up on the competition. It automatically puts them ahead of others. For the others who may not have the same skill set, still have the drive to get better, they will push through and train their FPS skills. Another issue begins here. The people in the first half of this category will reach a point where, because of their FPS prowess, they will be vastly ahead of the curve compared to everyone else who is playing APOC, and will do very well against the people who do not have the same FPS experience. This will be very boring for those people in the first half of this category because there is a large skill gap in the form of acquisition of FPS knowledge that will separate them from everybody else. The for fun players and the players who haven't realized this end up getting eaten alive while they try to either go through the process and improve or just quit. This results in a lot of new players giving up on the game upon picking it up, and top tier players simply getting bored with the lack of new challenge or just challenge in general. More and more people will get bored and leave as the content creators, which are the main marketing tool for the game right now, get less and less excited about the game, and this downward spiral continues until no players are left. This, in my opinion, really can all be traced back to the fact that there's just poor skill progression and not a clear definition of what is desired for a player to be good in the first place. Then we can go look at Overwatch again, and you can slowly start to see and put a picture together as to why FPS players that are veterans and new both got addicted to the game. Overwatch has viable skills for those players with pro and entry level mechanics. However, it prioritizes FPS mechanics first and foremost, which helps the design team stay focused on making the FPS mechanics feel good. first and foremost. This also lets people know what they're getting into before they even start playing, and when they get shit on by a really good FPS player, they're like, oh, yeah, it's an FPS game. What else can I really expect? All right, now we can talk about the elephants in the room. Steven, please send notes. The fact that it's a battle royale and the poor optimization. I mean, look, first-person shooter and frames per second share an acronym, so we can't ignore that, you know? While I do agree that these two things are hugely important, I don't think they're the two biggest things in terms of how the VR performed overall. We happen to have two perfect examples of this in other VRs named PUBG and Fortnite. The former being a buggy mess and having simply solid enough gunplay to carry it and cause it to become this whole start of the VR trend in the first place. Then we have Fortnite, which started out as the save the world game that no one knows what is and became one of the biggest games out there, mainly because of how fun and unique the gameplay mechanics were. And also having a little bit to do with timing into the market, considering Minecraft was on the downward turn. But that's another topic entirely. Now, after all this, I know some people are like, but Killer, this video is irrelevant. This is just a test. They shouldn't put enough time to develop a defined enough gameplay loop for the VR, and instead should put that time into the MMORPG. And you're absolutely correct. And in fact, I'm actually kind of glad things turned out this way, and we didn't have another Fortnite happen. Really, the only way to fix the game mode at this point would be a complete overhaul of the combat, which no one wants Intrepid Studios to spend time on at this point. The issue I want to highlight comes in with this jack of all trades mentality, which could very well lead Intrepid Studios to be a master of none. The reason I made this video in the first place is I think there's a fundamental design flaw in the way that they are attempting to implement action by not defining what it is and then going even further as to implement FPS mechanics as action, when in my opinion they're two vastly different playstyles in combat. The important thing to remember, however, is that this is an failure that can't be learned from in the future. I suggest against doing any extremely fast-paced combat within the action combat like it is now, and no, that's not me saying cater to the lowest common denominator, but it's near impossible to make FPS combat good in an environment with tab target and action. I think that putting heavy FPS mechanics in the MMO environment will cause action combat as a whole to be broken, and it will never be in a good spot. Either just be way too strong, and it would be way too weak. And the only way I really think that you can get FPS to work within the action combat sphere is either to have 80-20 or 90-10 in the favor of action over the FPS. In the end, I really just hope that Intrepid has no real plans of adding but a few FPS mechanics to the game, the actual MMORPG that is. I do love action combat, and I'm glad they're putting it in the game, along with Tab. However, this is a monumental task before even considering that FPS mechanics will be in the game at all. If you made it this far in the video, thank you so much. It really means a lot. This is the first video I ever really made and tried to make really good. Apologies for the mic quality. I do plan on getting a standalone mic fairly soon, just to increase the quality of the videos, And but if you enjoyed the video or you want to have a discussion about it, consider checking out my Twitch channel. I stream about 10 hours a week right now, and I plan on streaming more in the future. On the YouTube side, I plan on releasing another video or two after this one, talking about the melee ranged combat in more detail than this. I just wanted to release this video because I think this is the big picture issue as opposed to the actual balance of the weapons overall. Thanks for watching.